Hello guys, I'm going to talk about space grids and responsive design today. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about developing a grid system that is flexible enough to accommodate a variety of content, but rigid enough to form a recognizable system. All right, so in the world of graphic design, grids are almost essential for lining up elements, and in web design it is way more important to have an understanding of a literal grid in websites. So when we're talking about grids, we mean I say in design grid systems, what we do is we line things up. That's essentially what it kind of like boils down to doing, is lining elements up, whether it's the text, whether it's images, and all kinds of systems to basically make it easier for somebody who is reading the content to understand it and keep going from there. All right, so organization and hierarchy is an effective design system that takes precedent over individual elements so that the user perceives a cohesive unit. All right, organization and hierarchy is way important in web design because in organization you have to have an understanding of where things go, where things are, and have some kind of system in place to allow the viewer to easily get to the information that they need. Hierarchy is something I talk about all the time in design, because when you talk about design, there's always going to be some kind of element that you see initially, and it leads to another element, leads to another element, and then leads to another portion to get the reader to kind of like flow through the whole design. White space is something in design that we talk about a lot. It's called negative spaces a lot of times. And it refers to this kind of like this figure ground relationship where things are framed within a system. And white space is used a lot within graphic design. So if we look at like a site like this, you see that there is a lot what we call negative space. And that negative space kind of like uses to kind of like surround around this title of freedom of web design, and that kind of like frames it. But that space serves a purpose because that's what it does, is it frames it. It gives focus to what the reader needs to see, and having white space is not a bad thing. Clients will think it's a bad thing because then they can kind of think, well, let's put something in there. It's not. It's oftentimes they're just shooting themselves in the foot to do that. All right. Apple does a really good job of this because what it does is they use a lot of white space in a lot of their things. And it gives focus. It leads you through the page to go to elements that you can kind of like see and not see. Another type of system for white space and negative space is using this image here. All right. Even images can have white space in them. All right, that negative space that is leading to a certain area in the site design. Containment, which is borders, lines, and boxes, can be helpful in defining the space and containing elements within a subgroup. Now, I don't like to actually use a lot of, like, let's say, borders and lines around boxes. I would say a lot of times I can use solid boxes with a maybe slight line to kind of like separate it. So, whatever's going to help to kind of like get some kind of organization is best. So, like in this particular example, you kind of see that things are divided into sections, and using boxes to kind of like help to separate those is a nice portion or part of this particular design. As you can see, it's like you got a border or a banner up in here that basically is in its own box. Each of these are separated in their own box and they're lined up. Another section that has different things in there that kind of helps as well. Hey, grids. Grids help to organize the elements of a design. They organize the space within that design. So grids, we're not talking about like graph paper and understanding that everything is set up as like all these different little boxes. A grid, again, boils down to just lining things up. All right, so if you kind of see here, this is a literal grid. All right, you can kind of see how things are lined up. Even the headline is lined up with this edge here. This image is lined up with these elements here. Everything is set up as in a grid. You'll also pay attention that some of these elements, like these columns here, are exactly the same width. So those elements maintain in that grid and keep some kind of alignment going. And it's a good thing to have in a web design because, again, when you're dealing with web design, to code something a little bit different as far as width is a little bit more difficult and more of a pain. All right. Responsive design, which is reorganizing space to maximize the visibility of key design elements on varying screen sizes. All websites need to be responsive nowadays because long gone are the days that everybody is looking at websites on the desktop. They're looking at it more along the lines into laptops, iPads, phones, tablets, things like that, that basically it's all varying screen sizes. So when you have a site that is basically conforms to all those different screen sizes, we call it responsive designs. So it can form and mutate to different sizes depending on where the site is being viewed at. That's a necessity nowadays. So it's like you look at a site like this, how it conforms from a desktop to a laptop to a tablet to a phone. All right. It has to be responsive in a sense where it does conform or transform to fit those different sizes. All right. Responsive versus adaptive. Fluid versions. Pre-formatted design states. All right, so sometimes when you have responsive, you can change if you are on a desktop, for instance, and you have a browser open, you can change that size of that browser window and you'll see the site kind of like transform to it. Adaptive is where if it gets brought up on a desktop, it'll go to a desktop version. If it's brought up on a phone, it will go to a phone version, which is oftentimes a new different set of code. So that's what it means there with adaptive. And basically there's some advantages and disadvantages to it. Responsive, it's like, again, it's going to flow into different things as it goes, but then adaptive maybe have templates that work better on certain devices. So you can see that there are some advantages and disadvantages to it. All right. So I'm going to end right there. So I will talk to you in the next video, and I will see you then.